Hello everyone, and yes, this is definitely not New York City that you are looking at and what usually I show on this channel. So let me explain, as I do have some regular viewers by now. For this week, I was to show you part 2 of the Cradle of Aviation Museum out on Long Island, as we now will focus on the jet age. However, making these videos is actually time consuming. For instance, if you see me posting like a 15-minute video, then that means I usually have like 40 minutes, if not more, of footage I recorded. And then I have to do some editing, which is easy, but very time consuming. In fact, that was one of the first big problems I ran into with my videos on this channel. I simply did not record enough, and then I had lots to say and just did not have enough footage to show, hence I wasn't really sure how to do the final edit. In the last year, I learned my lesson, and now I always record way more than I need. But again, it's adding more work because I have to edit most of it out. So the same is true for the video about Long Island and aviation. When I was done, I had over an hour and 20 minutes of footage. Hence, even separating it into 2 videos is a lot of editing, for which I just simply did not have the time this week. But what I could have done for this week is put together a video in which I had to go to Boston. And originally it was to be a trip for 2 days, but life likes to give you turns and twists, and my stay in Boston was almost 4 days. Hence the reason I was not able to finish my Cradle of Aviation video for this week, but I figured I will take you along on what I saw in Boston, which was not that much, since I only had like 6 hours or so to enjoy myself and my free time, aside from official business stuff. But since New York City and Boston have some rivalry, especially in baseball like the Yankees and the Red Sox, this New Yorker had to disguise himself as a Bostonian for 1 day. And you know what? I think it worked. I have infiltrated the city for a few hours without even being noticed. Look how close I got. Fenway Park, where Boston Red Sox play. All I had to do is just yell very loudly, "Let's go Yankees!" And I might not have the opportunity to put this video together for this week. So I really had to fight my inner urges. Okay, so let us take it from the beginning. Since I had to be in Boston at 7 o'clock in the morning, that meant I had to leave New York City just after 2 o'clock. And so driving in the middle of the night after 2 hours of sleep is pretty dangerous. But I love it. No music, no distractions. It's just you and the car as it pushes forward through the darkness, with the sound of the wheels and the engine creating a symphony for the ears. And although falling asleep is not my fear, you know what is? Deers. That is probably my biggest fear, which keeps me 100% focused on the road. If that is not your fear, then you have not come face to face with a deer in the middle of the highway at night. I did a few years back. When I was coming back from upstate New York, I missed a deer in the middle of the highway by just literally few inches. I'm not even joking. It was honestly like maybe 6 or 7 inches. And since then, I do not even take the center lanes on the highway for granted. But driving all night gets you tired. So the first thing I wanted to do is just stretch a little bit on the bed and get some coffee. By the second day, they already knew me and sat me down next to all the coffee and the cups. And this was the view from the room in my hotel, overlooking the food court. They knew exactly where to place me, next to the food. Now, I'll be honest, on my first day, I did miss New York a bit, and it seemed like everywhere I went, my city followed me, like Brookline Avenue. I mean, you have to admit, it sounds and looks a bit like Brooklyn, or this pizza place. But quickly, the city grew on me. It is really a nice place. Lots of universities, medical institutions, and history. So that is what I had to explore in the few hours that I had to myself in the city. So naturally, I made my way to see some of these historical stuff because being a history professor, I have to show the YouTube world once in a while that I actually care about these things. And my knowledge extends beyond just reading books, which I know, it's so overrated these days anyway. But in many places, the city of Boston really gives me a feeling of like a European city. Especially when, now a few months back, I went to Poland and I walked through the city of Warsaw. Being in some neighborhoods in Boston gave me that very similar vibe. Now, I'm not saying it's the same because it's not, but when I was walking through the streets in Boston, it is one of the first things I thought about. And so there is some resemblance. But again, I had to check out some historical locations, like the old State House, in front of which, in March 1770, the Boston Massacre occurred, where British soldiers fired into the crowd, killing 5 people. Just few days later, one of the Patriots, Paul Revere, created an engraving of the incident you see here. In fact, sometimes I use this as an assignment in my American history course, as the painting itself is not an accurate representation of the events, and there's a lot to talk about here, but I want to point out that there in the back is this old State House you see here. Kinda cool. But the Boston Massacre essentially increased the tensions with Britain and steered the colonies closer to the American Revolution. Nearby is another building where Bostonians would gather to protest the Tea Act, and once again, what they believed were unfair practices of their mother country, Britain. Hence, what followed was the famous Boston Tea Party. So let us go to that spot now. But along the way, there is just so much history here. Like, for instance, nearby is where Benjamin Franklin was born. So there's really truly a lot to take in a rather small area. And the Boston Tea Party roughly took place here. In 1773, over 90,000 pounds of tea were dumped into the Boston harbor from ships in an act of defiance and a call for no taxation without representation, since the 13 colonies were not represented in the British Parliament. Therefore, all the new taxes and regulations by the British government, they felt were, well, in simple terms, not fair. But right there on this building, you see there is a marker which highlights this spot and the Boston Tea Party. So right there is that building with the marker of the Boston Tea Party, and right there on the other side is the Boston Tea Party Museum. So you see, even when I have few hours to myself, my nerdiness kicks in and I have to look for sites like these. But overall, I have to be honest, I like the city. It's a beautiful city. It's clean and well maintained. And again, I know there are exceptions, and I am basing this on just few hours of walking around, but I think it is. The only exception for me are the roads. Again, maybe it's just me, but the roads are in a pretty bad condition, with one hole on top of another. I thought that New York City roads are bad, but I honestly have to say, Boston is much worse for me. But again, I did not do a tremendous amount of driving, as I always like to walk around and experience the city on foot. It takes longer and it tires me out, but I feel it gives me a better perspective on the city and the people. And I love the details in the city itself, whether some nice patterns and a little bit different materials being used in the simple crosswalks, to even light posts in certain areas which are really an artwork in itself. And sometimes I even came across really nice surprises, like in the Boston Common Park, for instance, by the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, there is a World War I sea mine. And to me, that was just so cool because, believe it or not, I do not think I have ever seen one from this close up where I could even touch it. But because there are so many schools here, I actually enjoy the vibe of this type of a university life. Back in New York, I got my doctorate degree from St. John's University. So that school does give off a little bit of kind of a university life with its own unique atmosphere, and honestly, a part of my heart always stayed there. But in general, many schools in New York City, like in Manhattan or Brooklyn, lack these huge campuses and like their own ecosystems. Therefore, being here for a few days made me remember my last years in college and kind of miss it, this type of a academic setting. But anyway, this was my week, aside from torturing my students with midterm exams before I left for Boston. So now I am back in New York City and I have lots of grading waiting for me. Therefore, once I do that, I will finish putting together the second part of the Cradle of Aviation video and post it next week. And so, last look in the morning at my food court before packing my bags and going back home. And I will see you all, hopefully, next week. Take care.